A lot of you have asked me what happened to my arm, and all I can say is this is what happens when you have too many fistfights with politicians. Actually, it was a rotator cuff tear, nothing that interesting. Well, sadly, as you heard earlier, Rex Murphy couldn't join us tonight, and he's joined us for, I think, every single event like this before, but he has a bad case of bronchitis, and unfortunately, he couldn't make it. So it falls to me to introduce our special guest, Danielle Smith. And I have a few slides that hopefully are, yes, there it is, that I prepared hopefully as an introduction to Danielle, to Premier Smith. And something you should know is that Danielle and I worked together at the CFIB for a number of years. So when I'm calling her now Madam Premier, I must say, I was used to calling her, hey Danielle, but now, of course, I have to observe the proper niceties. But anyway, Danielle and I know each other very well as a result, and I guess it just proves that everything good comes around again. In any event, the first slide here, I think, illustrates pretty well kind of the root of some of our problems, which is how we've seen so much government-funded so-called science, and over the years, and this just treats a few of the highlight items, not even anywhere near the full number, but of course in the 1960s we heard that our oil reserves would be depleted within the next 10 years, and 70s another ice age, and I remember that well. I was in my 20s in the 70s, and I remember we were all so terrified about the coming ice age. And then, of course, we had acid rain, which was going to ruin our lakes and destroy crops. And the ozone layer, of course, we haven't heard about that for a while because we fixed that through our own ingenuity, which is something that humans are actually pretty good at when it comes right down to it. And, of course, the ice caps were going to be gone, and on and on and on. We've heard, we have a climate crisis now. It's no longer just climate issues, but it's a climate crisis. But this is not to say that we should not be doing sensible things for the climate. Of course we should. And I'm sure Danielle will probably speak to this a bit later, but we've seen so many foolish virtue signaling type of policies, and plastics is a classic example. They banned forks and plastic bags when they're selling worse plastic bags on aisle 5 that are worse for the environment than the ones at the checkout, and a lot of the so-called replacements for the things that are banned are actually worse for the environment. So the science does not back that, but of course virtue signaling, as we know, is a particular hallmark of our current federal government. I think, though, we also know that, let me make sure I'm using this device properly, that the real purpose of the so-called climate hysteria is control by government. And maybe it's not Marxism per se, but it certainly is giving governments much more control over our daily lives. And of course, we have a lot of international bodies right now that we know that would really like to control our lives. And they're all unelected, however. They're all unelected. We don't get a say, but they tell us how to live while they fly in their private jets over to Davos and live high on the hog while we eat bugs. I'm a vegetarian. I'm not going near bugs. I think this slide, too, illustrates kind of a classic example where American will abandon fossil fuels by 2050. What's China's climate goal? To have America abandon fossil fuels by 2050. And that's exactly the point. Here we are in the so-called developed world implementing foolish policies that don't have positive real effects on the climate, while the people that are really creating all the problems are not doing a thing in terms of their part. We know we've heard a lot about the just transition for Alberta that the Trudeau government would like to impose, and unfortunately it seems a good part of it, is taking high-paid, highly skilled jobs and transferring them into a much lower level of skills and remuneration. Another issue, and I just want to mention this in passing, another important issue I think we're all probably pretty concerned about is education. And I know Jamil, for example, has spoken quite frequently about critical race theory, and it's something that is here in Canada. The U.S. has made much more of a stink about it than we have, but it's very much here in our schools, and I'm sure a lot of you are aware of that. But I thought this was a classic cartoon. You said we're going to learn division today, and sure enough, we are, because it's a very divisive policy that is not a productive one for our children and future generations. I just want to note briefly that Jocelyn and I, and actually Leslie McMillan, who is also known as Anthony Furey's wife, are starting an initiative. We're calling it the Mama Bears, to start seriously opposing these kind of policies in our public education system. It's disgraceful that our tax dollars are going toward these ridiculous things. But one of our challenges, certainly at the Coalition, is that you warn people, and it's so difficult to warn people about the true nature of government. And here we have, of course, Mr. Cow talking, Mr. Conspiracy Theory talking about the meat packer. And what we heard, Jocelyn and I were both in Ottawa for the last couple of days with Jamil at a conference he organized. And the discussions on the media were quite fulsome, were quite comprehensive, in that it is very difficult to get our message across right now to a broad audience. It's great to see independent media. There's a lot of good independent media. Some of them are here with us tonight, and they won actually one of our awards last year. But still, we have a lot of that mainstream media that we are subsidizing with our tax dollars, who do not listen to anything but this accepted sort of woke theory. And finally, thank goodness the pandemic's over. Touch wood quickly, because we never know with this sneaky virus. But and we don't have to social distance anymore. But I just want to say that there's one type of distancing that we all still should practice, and it is socialist distancing. I'd like to briefly introduce Danielle. As I mentioned earlier, we were former colleagues, and it's great to see her in such a position of power right now, because she's the kind of politician we need in Canada. As you know, I'm sure you know, she was a former journalist, politician, and as she said earlier in our roundtable, she seems to go in cycles where she gets into politics and then goes back to journalism and then gets back into politics and so on. But I think we should all be grateful that she's in a pivotal role in Canada right now. She's facing an election, as you know, at the end of May, and that'll be a challenging one. As a student, I also read, Danielle, when I was looking up your bio, that you apparently worked at a bingo parlor when you were a student. And I thought, that's probably pretty good preparation for politics, you know? As Alberta Premier, Danielle has challenged, in a very short period of time too, she has challenged the federal Liberal government on many of its policies that are harmful to Alberta and harmful to Canada. One thing that frustrates me is how many people in Eastern Canada don't understand how important Alberta is to the entire country. When they see Trudeau, do something stupid that punishes Alberta, too many Ontarians think, oh, well, not my problem. You know, that's Alberta's problem. But of course, nothing could be further than the truth. And I know you all realize this. Many of you have businesses that are very integrated with Alberta businesses, not to mention the many, many, many billions of dollars that Alberta consistently sends to the rest of the country in terms of equalization payments, and in so many ways, Alberta drives the economy of the entire country. And we need something we do as a coalition as best we can is continue to reinforce that message, because ultimately it should change the way people vote. And that is our ultimate objective, is to get governments that recognize those kinds of truths. Danielle has also been a stalwart defender of our valuable oil and gas sector, while championing industry initiatives to reduce emissions and encourage more Indigenous participation. participation in major energy products. So once again, the notion that we don't like what's going on at the federal government regarding so-called climate and environmental issues does not mean that we want to do very productive, meaningful, measurable things for the environment and the climate. And that's something that Danielle is championing as well. So it is my great pleasure to introduce to you the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith.